Time-lapses. Time-lapses are special. They provide us with a unique opportunity to experience time at a different rate, to compress or expand time and watch the world go by far beyond our usual perception. In a way, time-lapses allow us to look at the world from the outside. They're a peek behind the curtain of our human experience. But time-lapses are also a great opportunity to bridge the time between your arrival at a shooting location and the arrival of good light. So I hope this little tutorial on how I usually go about creating my time-lapses will help you make the most out of your photography outings.
Hi, we are in the Dolomites, up Paso Giao, and it's the middle of the day and the light's pretty rubbish. I figured I'd shoot a time-lapse. There's this iconic scene to my left here, and huge amounts of clouds rolling through, so it's great use of, conditions that aren't really conducive to nice, soft, warm light photography, but rather these harsh midday conditions. Shoot a nice time-lapse and walk away with something interesting nonetheless. So I thought I'd do a little tutorial on how I go about shooting a time-lapse. And it's about 4 to 5 steps that I stick with to make sure, I've got everything locked in the way that it needs to be. And first thing we start with is a composition. And in this instance, I wouldn't necessarily shoot this as a photo in this layout, just because I feel like the mountain is sort of somewhere in the middle of the frame. But what's going to be interesting in this time lapse is the shadows cast by the sunlight between the clouds down here along the hill, and then obviously all of the clouds up there moving. Those are the two elements that are going to make for an interesting time-lapse here, because obviously you want to have as much motion in there as possible. What's the point otherwise? Right, so this is our composition. We know what the motion is going to end up looking like. We need to make sure our focus is locked in before ND filters go on the lens, because you just want to rely on as clear an image to lock your focus in. You don't want to have a thick ND filter. It's going to be like an ND64 interfering with the focus. So I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to press the focus, double check that, yep, we're sharp. Alright, so focus, step 1 is a check. So now what we want to do is find out how do we expose this. The standard exposure right now would be, I'm shooting at f11, I like that as the sharpness of this Sony 24-105, looks beautiful. That'll be 1/25. So we're going to use ND filters to stop that right down and create about 1/3 of a second for our shutter speed, because that just creates the motion blur that we're after. And for that I'm going to use one of my case magnetic neutral density filters. Just need to find where I place them, right here. And in 1 second, try this out with, my assumption around this daytime is that it's going to be an ND64. Let's give that one a go. All right, obviously completely blacked it out right now. And now what we do is we open up our shutter speed, and there we go, 1/5, 1/4, 1/3, 0.4 of a second. That looks pretty good to me. And you'll notice how I'm keeping a whole bunch to the right of the histogram open, because I'd rather underexpose a time-lapse like this a little bit, since you never know, the clouds might open up all the way, and if they do, the scene is suddenly way brighter than I want it to be, and if that happens halfway through my time-lapse, the whole thing is essentially cooked, because it'll blow out and I can't use it. Alright, so now we've got our focus, we've got our exposure time, which comes down to 0.4 of a second, which works great for me. A little trick I like to do now, just to keep my files managed properly, is I'll turn the camera off and I'll swap out my memory cards, because I'd like to have all of my time-lapse files stored on one memory card, which will make it much easier to just manage all of those files and potentially many time lapses I will be shooting on this trip when I'm eventually back at the computer. So that's the next step, is swapping those SD cards. Third one, quite important if you're shooting on a high resolution camera. I have to do that since my cards aren't fast enough. I shoot the 61 megapixel files compressed rather than uncompressed. Makes very, very little difference in the final video, and it just means that the files are 50 megabytes rather than 150, and the card can't keep up with the capture speed. All right, so what else do we need to do? Oh, here we go, very important. Turn off your optical stabilization if your lens has any of it. That's the next step. I've lost track of the numbers, so I'll put those numbers up on the frame. And now what we also want to do is, I don't know if you can see anything on this screen. What we also want to do is change the auto white balance to just a locked in. I do 5500 Kelvin. That's not really necessary because they're raw files and I can adjust that later in post. But it's just one of these things that if you do it now, you don't have to sort it out when you're at the computer piecing together your time lapse. And you know, the less we'll have to do there, the better, because time lapses are a fair bit of work. Okay, so from here, I would go into this old, really annoying Sony menu. I've customized it to have, geez, is that visible? Here we go. I've got my interval shooting function in my favorites. I'll turn that to on. I'll say shooting start time 2 seconds after I've let go. Since we're shooting frames at under, about half a second, we can take one every second. And I want to get a lot of shots, 720 in total here. 720 means on a 24 frames per second timeline, we'll get around 30 seconds out of this video, which I reckon is a good idea. It's a nice length. And again, seeing as how large the sensor is, I can actually pick that apart and really create more than one time lapse in total. Okay, so what we'll do from here is, got that ready to go. And okay, we're at 0.5, half a second now for our shutter. Probably good too. And I'd say I'm going to turn the screen brightness down. Not necessary, but it'll just save some battery. All the way down. And now we say hit it, and it's starting to roll. Obviously you can't see that anymore now. Great. Yeah, here we go, and our time lapse is rolling. What's that going to take? 720 seconds. Somebody do the math for me real quick. Yeah, this will just roll now, and once I've pieced together the files in a couple of weeks when I'm at home, I'll piece all of this together and this will be the time lapse. Let's hope it worked out.
I shot thousands of time-lapse frames during my time in the Dolomites, always applying those same few steps to ensure I'd walk away with the intended result. And those few steps, that simple principle, equally applies to shooting at night, which have allowed me to capture things like this. I hope you'll find some use in this tutorial when you're out in the field capturing your own time lapses, but if you have any questions or comments, obviously just let me know below. For now, thanks as always for watching the channel. I'd be so grateful if you liked this video and considered subscribing. There's so much more to come, and until then, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.